Never mind.
Going well, so.
We're joking about it.
Right, so, afternoon, people. Gav, Duncan, and Bálint, Sean Kuti, here again, Black Sheep. Yes, we still are. And it's probably not going to change soon, is it, Bálint?
No, it's not going to happen.
Okay, never mind. Okay, fine, we can live with that. But we would like to, with your permission, expand your brains slightly. Because, unfortunately, and I know that Bálint is always very, very polite about when we get to this subject, I'm less polite. I do feel that your ignorance is holding you back. And so, with no disrespect intended to anyone, you have to know that what you know about Hungary is not enough.
Biased.
Exactly. Not enough, biased. And the problem is, once again, that ignorance in itself is not a problem. I'm ignorant about millions of things, and I have no idea about things. I don't want to. But if somebody is ignorant, then their ignorance can be exploited, and they can be convinced of that which is not true, which we see on a daily basis reflected in Western media when Hungary is the subject. I thought we'd touch on one of the many elephants in the room, because there is more than one elephant in the room. Once again, last week, we saw the Hungarian Prime Minister at NATO, NATO meeting? No,
NATO meeting at Hague, yeah.
And then that was followed by the EU, once again, the EU, another summit.
I can't recall how many times they have met and
exactly
squabbled about everything.
But I mean, the interesting thing was that the Hungarian Prime Minister came away with a positive... Perhaps positive is the wrong word. He came away saying, listen, at least NATO has found itself, NATO has come to its senses, and NATO said, listen, when it comes to Ukraine, it cannot be considered. Ukraine is at war. If NATO accepts Ukraine into its ranks, then that would automatically mean that we are potentially at war with Russia, which would potentially lead to World War III. Fine. Everybody can see that that's a cold, calculated, emotion-free decision, and it's legal, and it's perfectly understandable.
As it should be.
As it should be. Now, this is the thing. The problem we have is that if we cast our eyes over what the Western media say about us in relation to Ukraine, I swear that most of it is it's not born of ill will, it's just born of ignorance, that people don't understand the reasons why Hungary refuses to toe the line, why Hungary doesn't do what everybody else is doing. And I thought we could just explore a few of those. The main one has got to be that Hungary is not prepared to provide weapons, provide armaments for Ukraine for a very simple reason. The fact that there are 150 to 200,000 Hungarians living in what is now Transcarpathia. Now, here we have to admit that, again, we come up against a wall of ignorance, and it's not the Westerners' fault, it's just the fault of the education system they have. But a couple of years ago, me and Avi were in our flat coming down the stairs, and we bumped into a woman who was a French woman who bought her daughter a flat in our building. Fine, we got talking, and automatically the subject of Ukraine came up. Why isn't Hungary doing this? Why isn't Hungary doing... And here was this woman who was relatively well educated. She's not a young woman, so it's not a teenager who doesn't know anything. And she said, why won't the Hungarians help the Ukrainians? At which point we said, well, we are helping the Ukrainians. We've undertaken the largest humanitarian support mission.
Longest.
Exactly, in Hungary's history. In a history of 1,000 years, this is quite an achievement.
Quite something, yeah.
Exactly. But this woman didn't understand. We said, well, Hungary can't do anything because there are 150,000 to 200,000 Hungarians living in that area, this part which is right next to Hungary. And the woman's reply told us everything. She said, what, did they go there for work? And you say, no, they didn't. Of course they... What, you heard about people going to work in Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and also Transcarpathia? No, of course not. Nobody moves to... You don't get 200,000 people moving to Ukraine to work. And this woman didn't know. What this woman didn't know is that following the First World War, the defeat of the Hungarian First World War, there was the peace dictate, essentially, to give it its true name, where the winning allies dictated what would happen to Hungary, and Hungary was carved up and it lost 2/3 of its territory. Now, That's a hugely devastating statistic. 2/3 of a country were taken away.
Yep. That's why the name Trianon, and that was the palace where this dictate was signed.
Exactly.
Whenever any Hungarian, usually if not a big city liberal, everybody gets upset when they hear the word Trianon. And I had issues with friends, relatives coming from Switzerland, Australia, Germany, that they didn't know anything about it. And when I told them, okay, in the case of the United States, let's talk about how would it look like in the US.
Exactly.
Mexico takes back everything from California to Arizona, New Mexico, and all the rest. France takes back all the places which they lost at the Louisiana Accord in 1803, and middle US goes back to France. Britain gets some part of the northern areas, and the US goes back to almost basically the original 13 colonies. How would you feel after that? And I said, I didn't know about that, yes. And I said, it's basically not your problem, but when you're forming an opinion about something like that, or in the case of UK, imagine that Wales and Scotland is taken over, and Wales, let's say, belongs to Spain, and Scotland belongs to France, and you still lose a part from England itself, you lose some parts because they needed the train tracks. They wanted you to not to have the possibility to mobilize and you bring your troops to the front on railway tracks, so they take away some other parts of, let's say, Liverpool or something like that. How would you feel that? It's been hundreds of years and we still haven't forgotten. We can't forget. I mean, more than 2 million Hungarians living abroad.
Exactly, but this is the thing that when you explain to people, they do. I've told people the same as you've told people, and they say, "Oh yeah, but I mean, it was a long time ago. Can't you just get over it?" It's like, get over it. It's like,
you tell the Ukrainians to get over it.
Exactly. We've got the same thing. We say you take away 2/3 of a country and you just expect that wound to heal. That's impossibility.
Yeah, and if the countries which got those territories would have been Europeans, tolerant, and what else can we say?
Open-minded, free-thinking.
And soft and polite and stuff like that. Even though that would be an issue, look at what happened to Alsace-Lotharingen between the French and the Germans. But those are not.
No.
I mean, still millions of Hungarians are oppressed for speaking their own language.
Exactly.
And there's a saying in Transylvania, which was given to Romania, that we haven't left the country has left us.
Exactly. I mean, we've got the same thing, that people don't understand it. And I admit that it is... I accept from a Western point of view, this is a very difficult thing to wrap your head around. When I first came to Hungary, I'd never heard of it. I had no idea about it, and I was told, and I could not understand it. I went through, people explained, and again and again and again, and I literally could not understand it. I couldn't work out how it's possible, because you say, well, this isn't possible. You cannot have the border of a country moving to then be somebody else's country, leaving these people who were born in the same place, lived in the same place, and suddenly overnight the border crosses them. They don't cross the border crosses them, and they end up being the second-class citizens of a different country. It would not work, and it took years before we went to Slovakia, which used to be Upper Hungary. And it was only then, and then also once again when we went to Erdély, we went to Transylvania, which used to be Hungary, and there the penny dropped for me in that you have travelled 1,000 kilometres, say, and you are surrounded by and speaking to and seeing Hungarians. So that's when the penny dropped for me. But for the Westerners, it is a difficult concept to grasp because it is the most unusual. I don't think there has been such a cruel and unusual punishment in the history of mankind. This is ridiculous that they tried to destroy the country. They removed 2/3 of it. They gave Transcarpathia to the Ukrainians. They created Slovakia or Czechoslovakia then from part of Upper Hungary. The Serbs, or what was Yugoslavia, got part of Lower Hungary. Even the Austrians. Now this
That's the most outrageous part. That's the most outrageous part.
In that the Hungarians were taken into the war by the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, which essentially was the Austrians themselves dictating to the Hungarians, you will come along. And at the end of the war, the Austrians were given part of their monarchy back. It's like, what the hell is going on here? How can this be? I mean, that just underlines it. How unjust the whole thing was. And we look at the fact that people say, for example, people come to Hungary and say, well, it's very difficult to use the rail network. I mean, everything seems to go through Budapest. I have to go through Budapest to go here. Say, yes, because in Greater Hungary, before 2/3 of the country were taken away, it made perfect sense. But lop off these pieces around the edges, and now you just have a system which is like, well, it doesn't really work, and in order to get here, you've got to go here and here and here and here and here. It is chaotic.
That's what I'm talking about. That the point is, and maybe we are unfair with the Westerners, because if it took you years to grasp this idea, maybe we should push harder and still don't understand why we are not, let's say, postering it and publishing it and talking about this issue, which is basically the biggest minority in Europe, spreading to 1, 2, 3, 4 countries.
Exactly.
And funny. It's a tragic-comedic situation when a friend of mine went to Transcarpathia and was speaking Hungarian on the street. It was before the war, but after the 2014 Maidan Square coup, and he was asked by Ukrainian chauvinists why he's speaking Hungarian, and he had to show his passport.
Because I'm Hungarian.
Because I'm Hungarian. I'm sorry, I'm a tourist here. I want to talk on my own language.
Yeah.
And I said, you are allowed to do it.
But
can you imagine that?
Exactly, and we've got the same situation now, where the Ukrainians, the Ukrainians are once again. This comes down to the fact that Hungarians have much more experience of Ukrainians. Hungarians have much more experience of Russians, of Slavs. And yet we see that from the West, they're saying things like, well, you should do it like this. It's like, no, it can't be possible. It can't be done. The Ukrainians, essentially, the country was split into West and East, and most of the people in the East were ethnic Russians.
Yep.
So we've got a split within the country, and the Ukrainians in Kiev, the essentially Western-leaning Ukrainians, wanted to crack down on these Russian Ukrainians. Yes. So they started to introduce things like the language law. But they didn't do it. Instead of using a scalpel, they used a bread knife.
Yeah.
And you sort of say, listen, if you want to crack down on one particular ethnic group, then I'm quite sure there are legal ways to write laws which can crack down on that group and that group alone. But they didn't do that. They applied it across the board.
Yeah, but that's the main issue, that the Ukrainian national identity is built along the same principles as the Slovakian and the Romanian, because these are more or less new, or in the case of Romania, artificial languages and nations. And the Ukrainians wanted to have a pure Ukrainian country, and in that sense they weren't even willing, and the elite weren't even willing to get into compromises. And we touched this issue on the previous conversation, that a Hungarian government, and I'm not doing internal politics, dear viewers, forget it, I'm a security policy expert. But if you're talking about your own people across the border, and they have rights which were given them after the Soviet Union split up and the independent Ukraine came to life, just can't take it away.
Exactly. I mean, this is a basic rule of international law.
Yeah.
Those rights which have been given cannot be taken away. But that's what's happened with the Hungarians. So now we have the situation with Hungarians living in Transcarpathia, which, like I said, they didn't move there.
They were born there.
They were born there. They are citizens of this, but they are treated as second-class citizens, and they are not allowed. If there are more than 2 Hungarians speaking Hungarian, then that's not allowed. That's illegal. They can be arrested unless they're in church.
Yeah.
Hungarian children cannot be educated in their mother tongue. And the European Union, which is normally banging the drums so vigorously for certain
minorities.
Exactly. Then at this time, the European Union kind of shuts its eyes and closes its ears.
Yep.
But to come back to the original question, which the Westerners don't understand, why don't the Hungarians supply arms? The Czechs or the Slovaks supplied bombs.
Basically everything.
Exactly.
Tanks, self-propelled artillery.
And I remember seeing that the Russians were watching this, and they bombed the train that they were on. Yeah. Okay, so the train was destroyed, and they said, well, look, this is a lesson to you. Don't send armament, because we can see you doing it, and we will destroy it. But the interesting thing was, where was the train destroyed? It was destroyed in Transcarpathia, which is where all the Hungarians live. So if the Russians can hit a train in Transcarpathia, and if tomorrow the Hungarian defense minister or the Hungarian foreign secretary or the Hungarian government says, okay, change your plan, let's start sending bombs, rockets, everything to Ukraine, then the Russians will obviously say, okay, we will now punish you, and we can very easily touch these people who are your natives, and we can wipe them out. So the Hungarian government, understandably, I think, is very loath to paint a target on the backs of Hungarians. So, sorry.
As it is normal.
It's normal. I mean, but you have to understand, people should understand that we are not doing this just to be typically Hungarian and contrarian. No, you go this way, we'll go this way. Ha, sod you. No, this is a very, very difficult diplomatic situation for Hungary. Because, again, Trianon, end of the First World War, the country lost 2/3 of its territory. Hungary is potentially the only country which is bordered by its former territory, so it's the only country bordered by Hungary.
Yeah.
And all of these Hungarians living in these new countries or these expanded countries which gain territory from Hungary, obviously this is Hungary's Achilles heel. We cannot just pull on our boots and go in there, guns blazing, because there are Hungarians living there who will die in the process.
Yeah.
I don't think this is too difficult to understand, but
it shouldn't be too difficult to understand, but there are those blinkers we are usually talking about, and these blinkers are too big to notice the elephant in the room.
Exactly. But once again, we come back to the fact that the problem at the end of the day, sorry to say it, I keep on banging on about this, but it is ignorance. Now, I'm not blaming anyone for being ignorant about Hungary's history. Mainly because I was raised in the UK, I was educated in the UK, so I am just as ignorant of my own history and perhaps know more about Hungarian history because I came to it as an adult. I'll give you a perfect example. People are going to castigate me for this, but I'm sorry, I've told this before and I'll say it again. Our geography teacher, who was a very nice man, I was 13, 14 years old, and one day the geography teacher said, okay, today kids, we're going to learn about the countries of Europe. It's like, fine, okay, so we all got a little map of Europe, fine. And he said, okay, fine, here we go. And I was the fool who asked the question, sir, so Europe, which countries, Europe consists of which countries exactly? And I was told, Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and Russia. Okay, 14 years old, your teacher tells you this. It's like, okay, Italy, no, you write all this down. Now, I understand that there was a political economic reason behind this, isn't it? These are the most important countries as far as Britain is concerned from an economic point of view. And the British say, listen, you don't need to know all these countries. They don't speak English. It's not important. You just need to know them because when you become the managing director of Ford supercars, then you will be doing business with the Germans and the French and the Italians and possibly even the Russians. But at base level, a teacher's job is to instruct and teach, facts. And if someone is saying this, like, well, essentially Europe consists of 5 countries. Well, what about Belgium? It's tiny, don't worry about it. What about Amsterdam? It's tiny. What about the Nordic states? They're all cold there. Doesn't matter. This is what we were taught. Yeah. Now, my wife, who was educated in Hungary, knows more about the history of Britain or the geography of Britain than I ever did. Because she was educated in Hungary, because there were certain standards set.
Yeah, but that's typical in the sense that smaller countries need to be more aware of what's going on.
True.
I'm not defending the education system, but when I was in a student exchange in Germany in 1988. 1988. And we compared the history books.
Right.
And the German history book had only 1 page of Napoleon and Napoleonic Wars.
Uh-huh.
So that's something that started way back then.
Right.
And this is something we shouldn't put a blame on those people because they were not even taught about these issues. It's not about they didn't know. But what I would like to lay blame on people forming a very strong and distinctive opinion is that they don't know anything about what they have a very even disrespectful opinion about something. And just like you, I'm also ignorant in many areas. But when I don't know something, I don't make statements. I ask.
Exactly.
And I don't know too much about electrics. I don't know too much about car mechanics. And when I see something, I always ask.
But surely this is what we were taught as children. Yeah. It's like, we were told, if you don't know, ask. Yeah. Otherwise, we will never learn. But the other problem which exists, okay, we're not blaming these people for not knowing. Why would they know at the end of the day? Hungary is a tiny little country, 1,700 kilometers away from Britain. Why would they know? It's not a popular holiday destination. It's becoming more popular, but it's not next door.
We are not Spain.
Exactly. But the problem is that once again we come back to the fact that ignorance can be exploited.
Yeah.
And here is what we see. So when we get back to the idea of Ukraine, and when we get back to all of the daily sound kickings that we get in Western media because we don't join the coalition of the willing, I think.
Yeah.
Once
again.
We've had this before, but okay, fine. They couldn't think of a better name, fine, okay. It's not because we're being contrary. It's because we have to be very, very careful. We are treading on eggshells.
Yep.
You lot, the West, you've got far more money because you didn't have communism for 45 years, which is essentially, the best way to imagine what happens in communism or socialism is you take your car, you pull the handbrake on as hard as you possibly can, you then drive at the motorway at the highest speed you can manage. All the time you've got the handbrake pulled on and you are standing with both feet on the brake. Yeah, you will destroy your economy just as you would destroy your car. This happened to Hungary. It didn't happen to the Western Europeans. So the Western Europeans are sitting in a capitalized, well-capitalized situation. Their system has never had theft at a state level, the same as we have seen in Hungary and other countries of the former Soviet bloc. So they're already way ahead of us. When they say to us, for example, why are you complaining? You can get your oil from somewhere else. We can't. We're trying, but there's only one oil pipeline. Okay, there is another one now coming from the south, but that's been the last few years of Hungarian diplomatic work working overtime to try and get hold of another source of oil and gas. It's not so easy for us.
There's another one towards Croatia, but they charge so much for it.
Four times the normal price.
Yeah, that doesn't worth it.
Exactly.
As simple as that. Yeah, basically, what people just don't want to understand that either we can't allow ourselves the luxury of paying the 2 or 3 times more for raw material or energy like other countries. We're not even willing to do it.
Exactly.
So this is not my job to protect our prime minister, and I'm usually shy away from internal politics for a number of reasons. But he had a very good sayings. He had a lot of good sayings, and one of them is, we are Hungarians, not stupid.
Exactly.
So please allow us to be Hungarians and not stupid.
Plus the other thing is, we keep on coming back to this, that we are laid open, vulnerable to attack.
Yeah.
We only have one source of oil and gas. Sorry, you've got more? Well, congratulations. Bully for you. But
supply us, please.
Exactly. Supply us, please. And if your citizens are prepared to pay 3, 4, 5 times more, then, well, congratulations to you.
Yeah.
We don't have that money.
Yeah.
We can't afford to pay that. And at the same time, everybody in the West has one word that they absolutely love, the word which embodies the zeitgeist for God knows how many years, which is empathy. And so I say, well, fine. We're always roundly criticised for not showing enough empathy to the Ukrainians. We're criticised for not showing enough empathy to the migrants. Say, well, look at our situation here. Yeah. We lost 2/3 of the country as a result of the machinations of the Americans, the French, and the English. We've got only access to oil and gas from one, perhaps 2 directions, and it has to be Russian oil and Russian gas. I'm sorry, we'd like to buy something else, but we can't. We're working on it, but we can't do it. Yeah. And at the same time, there is no empathy for us at all.
Yeah. And on the other hand, empathy is a positive feeling.
Yeah.
But why cannot be a negative person? Why do I have to be empathetic?
Exactly.
Well, who forces me to do it?
Exactly.
I mean, it should be, and everybody should be empathic, but look around the world.
There are lots of people who...
There's still starvation in Africa. There's still starvation in Asia. Why don't you help them?
Exactly.
I mean, this kind of, how should I say, directed emotions and this kind of directed train of thought really pisses me off. And I hope this will make it in the final cut, because this is not just unfair. This is upfront outrageous. That people are trying to not influence but control a way of thinking. There's a good joke, and I heard it from a rabbi. That, a guy from the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Uncle Kohn, flees to Belgium because he wanted to live somewhere else, and he's conscripted into the Belgian army. And when the drill sergeant starts to yell that Flamans to the left, Wallonians to the right, he asks, "Where do the Belgians stand, sir?" So, can we be Belgians, please?
Exactly. Now, this is the thing that this empathy, this desire, this instruction, this demand that everybody show empathy is also tinged with a moral point of view.
Yeah.
And you sort of say, well, okay, fine, but I don't think any nation, look across nations, look across the history of nations, nobody has a clean moral conscience. So we've got to say, for example, if I look at the British media, and the British media always say things, oh, look at these terrible Hungarians. Why aren't they helping the Ukrainians? And say, why aren't they attacking the Russians? Say, oh, so let's just wind the clock back a couple of years. And you were the ones who welcomed Russians coming from Yeltsin with bags of money, which was all needed to be laundered, and you let them buy football teams, and you let them buy this, and the City of London welcomed them with open arms, and they washed their money, and they bought their yachts, and they bought their flats, and they bought their penthouses and mansions, and that was okay for a while. And then, no, the Russians are bad. So now we've got to the level which is, it's crude. We have one group of people, Slavs, and they are cousins and they're related, and the Ukrainians are Slavs and the Russians are Slavs, and they are not two separate nations as such, or if they are, they're cousin nations. So this is not Uganda versus Canada. No, there is a very, very strong bond here. If you look at the language, everybody says, of course, Zelensky speaks Ukrainian. Yes, but he learned Ukrainian because he's a Russian. He's a Russian speaker naturally. Yeah. And if you look at the difference between the two languages, well, it's pronunciation. These are not two separate languages. So here we once again have this very, very oversimplified, crude, moral standpoint of the West where they say, look, the Ukrainians are saints. The Russians are devils. It's like, they're the same people. This is a fraternal war, essentially. These are not two separate nations if we look at it from a DNA point of view. These are essentially cousins and brothers fighting each other. So the idea of you being able to split and say, oh, these are the good Slavs and these are the bad Slavs, sorry, that's really not going to wash. The other problem is that, as the Hungarian Prime Minister pointed out, NATO has come to its senses and said, look, we cannot discuss this. Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO at the moment because it's at war. Okay? We need to wait for the war to finish, and then we need to wait for things to calm down. But the European Union is determined to crowbar Ukraine into the European Union. So say, well, that has with it other legal implications. As the Hungarian Prime Minister pointed out, nobody knows what the size of the country is. Because there are Russians in this area. We know what the size of the country was in 1990, but it's not the same, and it keeps changing on a daily basis. So you say, X square kilometers. You can't have that. We need to know exactly where your borders lie. We don't know the population. It was 50 million in 1990 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It's now down to about 20 million. So they've lost 30 million people. The Ukrainian state, ever since the breakaway from the Soviet Union, or from the collapse of the Soviet Union, has been nothing but a failed state run by gangsters. Now, we know this. Why do we know this? Because we live bloody next door to them. If somebody is in France, Germany, thousands of kilometers away, I understand that they do not see this, or they do not recognize this, or they do not know this. But if I want to know what's happening in your village, I'll ask you because you live there, I don't. I mean, it's quite simple. We know them better than the West does. We've seen the evidence of a failed state. At the moment, the Ukrainian state is only supported by donations. If the Western money stops, the pensions stop. The government workers don't get their salaries. The bills don't get paid. This is not a burgeoning, flourishing young state ready to rise from the ashes of former Ukraine. This is a complete mess.
And then on top of that, that's also a security risk. So there was a recent discussion when Kurt Volker, the former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, has openly admitted that the best chance Ukraine has got, and is the best chance ever since the war started, is a stalemate. Is a frozen conflict. And this was obvious from the very beginning. And it doesn't take too much knowledge into military doctrines, military tactics, strategy, or whatever. You only have to compare the two countries. And the moment that NATO decided under Biden, not under President Trump, under President Biden, that they're not going to help directly Ukraine, that war was over already. And you just can't talk about it. Then you are a Russian agent, and you are a paid provocateur and everything, but a gentleman or an expert. And the point is that Kurt Volker also gave the answer why this is so. It's because of the nukes. And when people, and in my profession, people started talking about you can't make a nuclear state lose a war Just look at what happened between Pakistan and India. The war has ended suddenly because one was on the verge of using a nuclear weapon this way or the other.
Yeah.
And it ended abruptly. So in that case, you can't do that. And this is not about peculiarities of security policy. It's about common sense.
Exactly.
And you just can't say these kind of things. And this is crazy. And when this war ends the way Kurt Volker predicted it, the best case scenario is a stalemate. The worst case scenario is Ukraine losing all of its sovereignty and its territory. What will happen then?
Exactly.
Why don't people think about the worst case scenarios while we're always talking about the best case scenario?
I mean, this is what I don't understand, because it seems to me that, okay, we hear that the Slovaks also have a similar opinion to us, or at least the Slovak government. Now. But whenever I look across the Western media, nobody is doing anything apart from saying, Ukraine is on the verge of victory. It's like, if we just look at the numbers, if we just look at the fact that the Ukrainians now have 47 out of 100 soldiers. Every 100 that they need, they only have 47. So the numbers are dropping. I know Ukrainians, former students who are in the military, who've gone back to the military, but their children have been spirited out of the country and they are now living in Germany. Nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants to put their sons and daughters, at the moment only sons, in the firing line. This is understandable. But the Russians have a huge population in comparison to the Ukrainians. So it's a mathematical reality.
It is.
They cannot win against Russia. And if they cannot win against Russia, then we need to start thinking, as you said, about what worst case scenario. Or if not the worst case scenario, let's not shock the Western Europeans by sort of saying, that we're going to have a series of heart attacks across the Western media. But different scenarios.
Yeah.
If the Ukrainians are seriously not going to win tomorrow afternoon, then, okay, what happens next? What happens next?
Yeah.
What happens next? The other problem, which, once again, the European Union charging ahead with blinkers on so that it can't see a damn thing, they keep on saying that, no, Ukraine will be accepted into the European Union, which means that presumably all the money which would normally go to maintaining the European Union will then go to Ukraine to rebuild the bloody place.
Exactly.
Because at the moment it's in a state of chaos. Okay, we also know that Ukrainians traditionally were never allowed to actually purchase land. They got it on a 99-year lease from the government or from the state, and then that was renewed. So Ukrainian farmers never actually owned the land they were farming. It was like, oh, this is leased to me. That's changed with Biden, and especially with Hunter Biden, who went in to make a couple of deals, and there suddenly, with the promise of big bucks, people said, oh, well, we can't change the law, and the Americans can buy land. So the Americans have bought land. Fine. But we say, well, if the Americans have bought land, then obviously the Americans will go in and they will reconstruct the country. Possibly. But who's going to work? We've lost 30 million people. Maybe the EU has plans to take these pesky illegal migrants from Germany, from France, and move them to Ukraine.
Imagine the Ukrainian hardliners. For those who are pale-skinned Hungarians or Russians who are not good enough Ukrainians. Imagine when they meet those people.
I don't see it as having a particularly positive ending if they go there.
No. I mean, the whole elephant in the room process is something like dumbest idea ever.
Yeah.
So I think that this is the biggest messing up in the history of security policy. I mean, if you take all these considerations, the people who fled to Germany, who have fled to Poland to avoid the war, won't go back. Why should they?
Why should they? Exactly.
And they need it where they are now. They work there. They have a life there. They have in many cases they have family there. Why would they go back? So this kind of approach where we don't ask questions, we just blindly follow the rules are definitely not, how should I say, fitting well into Hungarian way of thinking. And apart from that, we have our own issues.
Exactly. But also the other thing, when we talk about the dangers involved, we also know that at the beginning of the war, apparently, now what I've read, now this might be incorrect or it might have been changed, but they said that in Ukraine it was very, very difficult to purchase or to legally purchase and own a handgun. Fine. They said, on the other hand, anything which is not a handgun couldn't be bought essentially at the local shop.
Black market.
Oh, black market. And we had situations, I remember seeing reported on British news that they said, okay, now Zelensky said that, okay, we need to arm our citizens, and they were taking vans and
in the bands of
handing out submachine guns and assault weapons, assault rifles.
Yeah, in 2022, that was a common thing because they were fearing a Russian victory, and they have done it. And on top of that, CIA reported that 30 to 40% of weapons supplied to Ukraine is missing.
Now,
I mean,
just
think about it.
For me, this sets alarm bells ringing off very, very, very loudly. But it would appear that it's only with you and me that this is a problem. It's only with the Hungarians that we can see that there are potential problems with this.
Yeah.
If we sort of say we have, now the Ukrainians have been invited to the European Union, so there's free movement, free movement of people, free movement of labour, and free movement of weapons.
Of guns,
okay, great. I don't know. I see it as being I see it painted far blacker than the Western Europeans see.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's only because we're close to them. Maybe it's only because we know them better. Maybe it's only because we're next door. But at the same time, if there's a problem not even a problem, if something happens in your village and I'm over there, then I'm not going to decide to say, well, actually, I tell you what, I'll phone up Bálint and ask him what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
Isn't this the logical way? Shouldn't people be asking us what...
Yeah,
why?
On one hand, people have opinion about everything, and on one hand, they're ignorant about basically their own surrounding.
Yeah.
And adding 1 + 1 means usually 2. And
exactly.
This is something people shouldn't be really questioning.
No.
That this is going to happen. And there's a lot of reports and questions about look what happened in the Yugoslav wars.
Yep.
And they were much smaller in scale than what's going on in Ukraine. After that, Hungary, for example, had for years issues with fighters, especially people from irregular or paramilitary units who were coming into Hungary and committing serious crimes, robberies, killings, and all this kind of stuff. And also they were behaving aggressively because the war changes you no matter what you do. Where will these people go? And people just don't ask it, and they have no plans about it, and just rushing headlong into a chaos. They don't know anything about it.
It's going to be a disaster. The other thing, which again, presumably because of the ignorance, the Russians who live in the eastern part of Ukraine, and they are ethnic Russians. They are Ukrainian citizens, but they're ethnic Russians. And there essentially is the dividing line between the West and the East in Ukraine. If the European Union says, but we need to allow these people into the European Union, so fine. But this means that everyone's going to say, you're Ukrainian. Yes, well, I'm an ethnic Russian. Saying, in that case, we don't want you.
Yeah.
Because Russians are the devil, the Ukrainians are the same.
Or they are allowed into the euro, and they will be treated like in Latvia or Estonia and stuff like that. I mean, when the guy was speaking Russian, his own mother tongue in the parliament, and it was taken away. I mean, we don't have to lie the Russians. And I told last time...
Exactly.
5 times.
Five wars against them in 150 years.
Yeah, exactly. So we know them. And this is something you dear viewers, and people in Western Europe and in the US should also know. You have to know your foe if it's your foe indeed. And this is something you just don't understand. So if they refuse those people, that will be an insult.
Exactly.
If they let those people inside and they oppress them, that will be a casus belli.
Exactly.
That will be because Ukraine was attacked, among other reasons, because how they were oppressed in Eastern Europe.
But again, this is something that we only see reported in certain sections of the media, and definitely not in Western Europe.
Yeah. I don't know why. It's crazy, and double standards usually backfire, and we see a number of double standards.
I mean, we are on the receiving end of double standards again and again and again and again. And what I have to say is that we keep on pointing this out to people. It's like, no, these are double standards. And they say, no, we are morally untouchable. Nobody is morally untouchable. We know your secrets just as you don't know ours.
Yeah, the same as that. You wrote a quite long list about the elephant in the room.
The multiple elephants in the room.
Did we touch everything?
I think we did. I think we've touched on pretty much everything. Yeah.
Okay.
We've covered it. I mean, the only thing we could go into further detail on is Trianon, but that would take slightly longer than 40 minutes.
Yeah, that's something I think. Not even part of the Hungarian elite, the so-called liberal elite, don't understand.
No.
And we have issues making them understand why it is painful, why it is painful to see an original and traditional Hungarian drink called palinka, which is basically schnapps from different type of fruits, to see that it's an original Romanian drink called palinca.
Exactly.
Or cremesh, which means a creamy sweet, written with Romanian letters as a Romanian sweet. So this kind of thing, or chimney cake.
Exactly.
Chimney cake, the most typical Transylvanian sweet, which is definitely Hungarian. It's called
which is now
Romanian original stuff like that. So you just can't just walk away with it.
No,
and this defines a way of thinking. Defines still today what we think. And just give you one example. Bolivia has lost its exit to the sea 170 years ago, and they still have a navy, and they still have a navy day and stuff like that. So people just don't forget humiliation, and we were humiliated thoroughly and back and forth.
I mean, for anyone, when anybody ever says glibly, "Oh, come on, can't you just get over it?" No.
Yeah,
it is impossible. This is a wound which will never heal.
It's not like about losing a part of your finger.
No.
It's like losing all of your limbs.
Exactly.
And you just won't get away.
Exactly. So you say, put it to one side. Come on, positive thinking.
Yeah.
No.
We can still fly. Yeah. Or run. Yeah. This is something I think will change and have to change.
I am of the opinion that this is something which is essentially, it defines Hungarian politics, it defines Hungarian diplomacy, but it also now defines the Hungarian character. And there is no way of avoiding that. And I'm sorry, we're not going to apologize for the fact that this is the way we feel, because we were unbelievably treated. The treatment we received following the end of the First World War, and maybe it was for all in good intention, but they didn't achieve that.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we paid the price.
Yeah, I think that was the final closing remark.
Exactly right. Until next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for watching us, and see you soon.
See you next time.
Okay. Well, that was good. You came here very, how should I say, motivated or
or
touched by something that, but it was good.
Yeah.
It was good.
My God.
Yeah. What? Morning I had a recording with a friend of mine, and they created an alligator Alcatraz in Florida. Yeah.
Fucking great.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
But the Americans are, the liberals are,
Yeah, they're fuming.